Hello, welcome. My name is SlugMTG, and today I'm going to be talking about some of the Zendikar Rising cards that are entering the Pauper pool. Now, I would just like to say that I don't think any of these cards are going to be extremely broken or overpowered. I think overall, as a set, Zendikar, at least for Pauper, isn't going to add too much to the tier 1 decks, although I think there are some cards that will make a splash in the metagame, and I think that tier 2 decks really got some cool new toys. And I just want to talk about the top 5 cards I think will make a splash in Pauper, at least in my opinion. I should say that this is my opinion. I could be wrong. More than likely I will be wrong, at least about a few cards, and there's bound to be something that surprises me, surprises everyone on how good it actually ends up being. But before I get into the top 5, I do want to go over some honorable mentions. The first one I want to say is the party mechanic. When I first saw it, I thought the party mechanic was going to be absolutely horrible, but they actually ended up putting out a lot of support for the party, even at the common level. Out of the mechanics that generally only appear in one set, never to be seen again, this has to be one of the mechanics with the most support behind it in one set. It might be playable as a fringe tier 2 deck, maybe. They do have good payoffs and synergy cards with Cascade Seer, Malakir Blood Priest, and Ardent Electromancer. And given these cards, I think Grixis might be the best colors for a party deck. However, Pauper is a removal heavy format, and it's really hard to get these mid-range creature decks rolling, which is where I think Malakir Blood Priest and Ardent Electromancer come in, as Malakir can be a win condition, and the Electromancer can help ramp into more party members. And combined with Changelings, I think the deck might be somewhat playable. You might be able to win every once in a while. Just one thing to keep in mind, a Changeling is every creature type. However, it only counts for one of the party. So if you had one Changeling out, you have one party member, two party members, and it just kind of fills in the gaps where you don't have, which is why I think they'll be good if someone really wants to make a party deck, because they do fill in the gaps. If you just put in a bunch of different creatures, then eventually you're just going to draw like all wizards and nothing else. So I've gone on long enough about this. So I think party mechanic, honorable mention, might be playable. We'll see. Some more cards I would like to mention. Zulaport Duelist. I think this is a really cool card. Flash is extremely relevant, especially since this is at 1 mana. So a 1 mana flash creature, already pretty good. And then it actually does something when it enters the battlefield, as up to 1 target creature gets -2, -0 until end of turn, and its controller mills 2 cards. The mill I don't think is very relevant, but this can help trade in combat, can be a nice little combat trick, help you take less damage, help something else kill something without dying itself. I don't think that this is going to make too much of a splash, however, as at 1 power, it's not really going to be trading with that many things. The mill really isn't relevant and can actually end up hurting you, as if the opponent is playing a black deck with Gurmag Angler, you can help get that out just a little bit faster. And really, I think the only viable mill deck at the current moment is Turbo Fog, and Turbo Fog does not want this. So mill, not really relevant, except this does have Brainstorm synergy. So if you cast Brainstorm at your end step, and then you cast this, you can target Zulaport Duelist itself, and then you mill 2 cards. So the 2 cards that you put back on top of your deck are now in your graveyard. It can help you get rid of cards you don't want. So I think it's got some fringe playability. I think it's neat. I think it's cool, but I just don't think it's enough to really get off the ground. Next mention, Akum Hellhound. This helps bolster Gruul landfall decks. I have a Gruul landfall deck. This is definitely going in it. It's a great 1-drop. No longer have to splash white. So it helps concentrate the deck down so you're not playing with another color. It probably is not enough to bring landfall into an actual competitive deck, as Pauper is so removal heavy, but it helps bolster up the strength just a little bit. Landfall is already a pretty fun deck, so try it out. Could be fun. My next honorable mention is Scale the Heights. I think people were really excited for this card because it does so much. However, it just doesn't have a home in any deck, I think. I mean, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on something, you can gain 2 life, you can play an additional land, and you can draw a card, so it replaces itself and does all these other things. However, this is very much a mid-range card, and mid-range doesn't really exist in Pauper. As long as Flickertron is around, mid-range is going to struggle, and the problem I see is there's just not an existing deck that really wants this. if you do end up targeting a creature with the +1/+1 counter, if they kill the creature, the entire spell fizzles. So it is a little fragile. Doesn't have a home right now. However, if mid-range does ever become popular in Pauper or more of a tier deck and a viable strategy, I do think Scale the Heights is a card that will eventually find a home. I think it's just going to struggle for right now. And my last honorable mention, bear with me, Cliffhaven Kite Sail. It is a really good equipment. Costs 1, so it can be tutored with Trinket Mage. However, the important thing is that when it enters, you attach it to target creature you control, so you can bypass that equip cost. I think the deck that really is going to try to fit this in is Affinity, as you can give ATOG flying, makes it that much harder to block, and it can end up winning games, as not every deck is able to deal with a flying ATOG that effectively. Give something else for ATOG to sack. This could see play, although it's really only in one deck. I think it's kind of underwhelming other than Affinity decks. That's why I put it as an honorable mention. I know I had a few honorable mentions, but it's because I think there are some really cool cards in here that will help fringe strategies, but not quite enough to really justify being in the top 5. Going in the top 5, at number 5, we have Spare Supplies. So it is an artifact that costs 2. When it enters the battlefield, you draw a card. Does enter the battlefield tapped, but you can pay 2, tap to sack, and you draw a card. So it is colorless card draw. And when I saw this, I immediately thought of the cards that this is going to be competing for. So things like Prophetic Prism, Alchemist Vial, and Golden Egg. I do think that Prophetic Prism and Alchemist Vial are stronger, as the color fixing and the combat relevance is hard to pass up. However, there are decks that don't really care about that, and there are decks that do run 8+ of these ETB draw card artifacts, and I think in those decks, Spare Supplies is going to find a nice home, at least as a 2 of. So I am expecting to see Spare Supplies. I think it is a very good card. Definitely not a new all-star, but it's going to be a good value card, and I think it's going to be a really good option to consider in the future if you are brewing a deck that does want these effects, as drawing a card is just so valuable. This can draw 2 cards, does enter tapped, but I think it's just good value. I think it'll see some play. At number 4, we have Tuk Tuk Rubble Fort. This is not a red aggro card, as 3 mana, too much. However, Elves. I think Elves are going to love this card. Let me read it. So it's 2 in a red for a 0/3 creature wall. It has Defender, Reach, and creatures you control have haste. The big reason why I think this is going to be played is because haste as a static effect is so powerful. Already, this kind of beats Crashing Drawbridge, as with Crashing Drawbridge, you had to tap to give haste, which meant that Crashing Drawbridge was affected by Summoning Sickness. With this, you can put this immediately down, start tapping all of your elves, and having Defender and Reach is very relevant, as Elves is not the only deck that I think is going to try to fit this in. Wall Combo may want this as well. It's just giving everything haste is so powerful in those decks. Huge combo enabler here, and Reach is relevant as you can block the Mole Drifters, the Fairy decks. It is slightly outside colors for both Elves and Wall Combo, but both of those decks don't really have issues splashing for these other colors. So I think Tuk Tuk Rubble Fort is something that will be played in Elf and Wall Combo decks. It's just a huge combo enabler, lots of value, good card. At number 3, I have one of the most talked about new cards, Feed the Swarm. For 1 in a black, you get a sorcery, destroy target creature or enchantment an opponent controls, you lose life equal to that permanent's converted mana cost. The reason why this is so talked about is because mono black finally has enchantment removal. I think it's needed it for a long time now, not just in Pauper, but I think this is going to be a fantastic sideboard option because it is enchantment removal, but it also doubles as creature removal. So it is a flexible option. The life loss will be relevant. You might have to be a little careful. I think any monoblock control, Dimir, and Rakdos decks will want this, especially against Pestilence. I think Dimir will definitely want this against Pestilence, especially if you're running Dimir Fairies. The other enchantment decks that first come to mind are Boggles and Tortured Existence. I don't think you're really going to want this for Boggles, as it is an aggro deck and black already has Edict effects for Boggles. However, Tortured Existence, this will definitely be a relevant card in that matchup, as well as Pestilence. I think this will be an easy 2 of in the sideboard, but but it does get hurt with the fact that there just aren't too many enchantment decks at the moment, and one of them, you're probably not going to be sideboarding this in against it anyway. It's good to keep in mind in case enchantments ever really become a tier 1 deck in Pauper. It's just a nice option to have. My number 2 pick is probably the one I am personally most excited about, as I can't wait to brew with it. It is Marauding Blight Priest. For 2 in a black, you get a creature vampire cleric. Whenever you gain life, each opponent loses 1 life, and it is a 3/2. What's funny is I was actually brewing a deck around Epicura Blood, and then the very next day, Marauding Blight Priest was spoiled, and I think this is going to be a very fun card in Pauper. It's kind of a build your own grape shot for life gain decks. The combo potential is definitely there for things like Weather the Storm, and it could give way to a potential new Soul Sister archetype as life gain decks finally have a reasonable win condition, as Epicura Blood was just really expensive. I think another reason why this is going to be really good is it can also be grabbed with Unearth, especially in a Soul Sister archetype where your 1/1s are going to be dying. This could be very relevant as you just put 4 Unearths in the deck. You can grab Soul Sisters, you can grab your win condition, and then of course, I already mentioned Weather the Storm, build your own grape shot. It has decent stats at a 3/2, at least if the board is empty, it will deal damage other than just its triggered ability. And I think overall this is going to be a very fun card to brew with. I am definitely looking forward to playing with it and seeing what works. And my number 1 is probably the most talked about new common coming in, at least when it was unveiled. The subreddit went crazy. Cleansing Wildfire. For 1 in a red, you get a sorcery, destroy target land. Its controller may search their library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle their library, draw a card. I think this is going to go great into sideboards, and the first deck that comes to mind, I think, when anyone reads this, is Tron. However, I think this not only is a sideboard card, but people running red land destruction or Rakdos or Gruul land destruction, they'll also want this. As there are quite a few non-basics running around, Tron isn't the only deck running non-basics, as I think the real victim of this card will be bounce lands and thriving lands. Bounce lands especially, it's going to feel really bad to play bounce land, have to return a land, and then it just gets blown up with Cleansing Wildfire. And then with thriving lands, people put them in their deck because they're trying to run 3 or more colors, and if you keep blowing up their thriving lands, it's really going to choke out their options on mana. I think the strongest part about this card is that last bit of text with draw a card. The big problem with land destruction decks is that you spent a card to get rid of one of their lands. However, if they keep drawing lands or they play something despite lands getting blown up, you can fall behind on resources extremely quickly. However, with Cleansing Wildfire, it is a cantrip, so you play it and it replaces itself. So I think the draw card is really what makes this actually playable and what will see play. I think it's going to be a fantastic sideboard option, as you're no longer spending a card to kill a Tron land. You're spending 2 mana, but then you're getting a card right back. So it's going to help a lot. Good sideboard option. I'm happy to see it. I might not be happy to see it if my own bounce land gets blown up, but I think it'll be a good option for Pauper. Those are the top 5 cards that I think we'll see play in Pauper. If I missed anything, which I probably did, let me know in the comments below. I tried to look through Scryfall at all the cards and pull out the ones that I thought would see play, but inevitably I'm going to miss something. Or do you not agree with my list? Let me know. I'm actually very excited for Zendikar Rising. Like I said before, I don't think it's going to do a lot to affect the overall power level of Pauper or where the tier 1 decks fall, but I think it brings a lot to tier 2, 2.5 decks. There's going to be a lot of fun brewing with these new cards, and I'm looking forward to it. But anyway, I want to thank you guys so much for taking the time out of your day to watch my video. I really do appreciate it. But now, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to sit here and dread what Gavin Verhey meant when he said, "Watch out, Pauper players, there's something coming in Commander Legends." Bye!